I'm actually very happy to be part of this because not sure if all of you here are aware. This is a very unique kind of course. I think nothing like that in the domain of collective robotics, swarm robotics ever happened. So Mohsen was able to convince amazing people to join in this course. And I'm not talking about myself. So it's a great pleasure for me. I think, yeah, it's a world premiere of such a course. Really great to see. That's also great for swarm robotics, but also for everybody here who participates. So you should be glad that you found out about it and that you actually made this fantastic choice to join. Let's see. Okay. Also, the idea is to go relatively fast over quite some material here, which should be fine because we will stay on a relatively high level. And I hope that this doesn't frustrate you because it might be like most of what I'm doing here is a teaser, and then some other people will pick that up later and give you the meat about that, the real details. But always feel free to ask questions. We can look deeper into certain things, but I'm supposed to give you a quite good first overview here. So expect that we will stay a bit shallow. So we start from this. So this is a paper that also quite important people published. It's getting old now. This is from 6 years ago, but they tried to identify big challenges in robotics. And of course, when I read that, I was happy to, for example, read challenge number 4. So they explicitly mention swarm robotics as a focus challenge of robotics. And you can actually see that happening right now. So more and more people are getting interested in this field. So again, good timing, good that you're here. And this is really a relevant subject and will be one important future of robotics. Mohsen already has mentioned the book. So my usual pitch is this is the best book about swarm robotics. Also because it's the only one. So, and it's also getting a bit older now, but there will be a second edition. So if you find errors or you have some ideas of what's missing, you can also feel free to let me know. I have the opportunity to repair that in the next couple of months. Before that, there was for example, this book by Floriano and Mathiusi, where they at least had one chapter dedicated to swarm robotics, but otherwise not really many long reads out there. This is my unofficial bibliography. So if you're into reading, these are all novels, and you want to as a side dish to the course, you want to also read some novel, then you can look into any of these. There's a couple of more out there. I haven't read the Crichton book myself, but The Swarm by Schätzing, actually a German author. I'm not sure if you're aware of that or you were aware of that. Then Daniel Serrara's Kill Decision, and the good old classical book, The Invincible, from Stanislav Lem, from, I think this is at least 60s. And I mean, you might already guess from the titles somehow, these are not really positive stories about swarm robotics or collective robotics. And this is, of course, something we suffer a bit from in this field of research, that it usually comes with a negative connotation, also since recent developments, maybe for a good reason, but we hope also to do good things with this technology, of course. So if you want to get some entertainment on the side, maybe put one of these books next to your bed and do some reading there as well. So in the beginning, as I said, this is more like a teaser. I want to show you just a few videos. This is work from very important work from back in the time when at Harvard there was still a very good swarm robotics group There's still some people there, but Radhika moved. And this is a swarm of 1,024 robots. They say self-assembling, but they emulated these little kilobots that you see here. They just aggregate, they stop next to each other, and they're asked to form a user-defined shape. They do that in a fully self-organized way, decentralized. We will later touch it a bit more, like what does that really mean? But there's no outside control telling the robots what to do in what moment, besides like telling them in the beginning what kind of shape they're supposed to form. So yeah, just more details. So this approach has some flaws because these robots have to line up. So this does not really scale too well. But you can tell from these tiny robots that they for sure don't have too much skills, and still they manage very slowly, right? All these videos are sped up a lot. They manage to aggregate and well, they argue self-assembly, doing self-assembly and forming all these different shapes. And these are experiments that take 12 hours. So imagine these poor PhD students sitting there next to it, trying to make sure everything works. So again, like no details here. How does that really work? So just as a teaser, but very important work back then, because before nobody thought it's actually feasible to have 1,000 robots in one room and then also to successfully control them. This is then from my own work. This is only 100 robots, but the same robot, the kilobots. This is a so-called collective decision-making scenario. This was in collaboration with the ULB. This is a university in Brussels, with Marco Dorigo and Gabriele Valentini. And the robots are supposed to like check out these two sides. So there's the red side on the right-hand side and the blue side, hard to see, on the left-hand side. They need to go there to explore a quality. How good is that site? And then try to convince the other swarm members, like, hey, red is great, go for red. And in a collective decision-making process, they're supposed to agree on what's really the better option. And actually here, the red quality is said to be twice as good as the blue. So you would hope that you see more and more robots indicating with their LED that they're in favor of red. And this is a long video, so I'm just jumping forward here a bit. So you see already more and more of these red robots. It's arguably a very slow process, partially also because these robots are really slow, but they move around, they locally communicate, so they have very like incapable communication devices, so they can only communicate for a few centimeters. This whole table is more than a meter, and they can only tell their neighbors what their current opinion is. They collect these messages and then do, for example, a simple majority decision. So from the messages that they have received, they look at like, are there more in favor of red? Then I switch to red or stay red. And that's actually a quite simple mechanism, plus some modulation. If you have seen a higher quality for your site, then you would also disseminate longer. So you would longer send messages for the site. Otherwise, you wouldn't see like a consensus for red. So there's still like at least two blue guys, but maybe you can trust me that they will manage to form a consensus. So these are these typical lab experiments, but later I will also show you that swarm robotics is also moving on, and we're going also into like the wild and reality, and do we also do something out of the lab. So now my like kind of standard pitch of like, why is this all useful? There's many different ways of arguing why collective robotics is a useful thing to do. Just here, my standard pitch by complexity. So at least the computer scientists amongst you might have seen something like this, right? So this number of transistors on an exponential scale vertically over horizontally years, and it's increasing and increasing, not so much anymore, maybe in the last couple of years. But that means, for example, complexity in our computing devices is increasing exponentially. Other examples besides CPUs would be other complex devices that some humans managed to engineer, like the space shuttle, not active anymore, but we have other examples like particle accelerators or fusion reactors, still not ready to give us some good energy, but who knows. But these are certainly complex devices. And the question is a bit like, if we have this ever increasing complexity, I mean, engineering has a success story in like doing different methods like divide and conquer, modularization. If you look into software engineering, we have many means of dealing with complexity. But maybe at some point we achieve a level where we need a qualitative change and a paradigm change. And this could be something like swarm intelligence and collective robotics as an example. To like further motivate that, you can, of course, also compare different organisms, and then the standard, almost like the pet of swarm robotics is ants. And you can imagine then, of course, they have smaller brains than us. When talking to a biologist, you should always be careful saying like, these are simple animals. Well, not simple, but a bit simpler than us, with neurons in the magnitude of 10 to 5. And then if you compare that so all numbers might differ a bit depending on where you look them up, but humans then would have something like 10 to the power of 10. Here, just this pointer, like if you read literature from California, then often they would argue, when do we achieve human intelligence? And then they start counting transistors, comparing them to neurons, but neurons are much more complex than a transistor. And so I would say there's some fallacy there by just doing this purely quantitative thing of extrapolating and then saying, in 10 years, we will have human intelligence in AI. So ask me about it. I can give you long stories about that, but that's a strong opinion on my side. Generally, just like how is it possible that ants can still do clever things actually together well, they don't need to be as clever as us, but it's still amazing that with difference of 5 magnitudes, they're still able to do fantastic things, right? And to prove that a bit, just real quick, this little video here, that's taken from a documentary. And these people pour some concrete
Das Experiment erfordert eine erstaunliche Menge Zement.
Usually I turn off the sound. I don't know how to do that here. But they pour some concrete into the soil and then they dig something out. So now it's looking like archaeology. But you can maybe tell, okay, no, they actually killed a whole colony of ants. And it's gigantic, right? So this is an architecture they built. And maybe I stop it here also to stop the sound. This is what ants build, obviously by themselves. You have chambers, you have these tunnels, and how is this possible without having like a single ant in the whole colony drawing this blueprint of like where to put what? So obviously this is an evolutionary effect that ants were evolved such that they're able to only on their very local perception with their like tiny brains, they're still able together to build these like complex architectures, right? And that's like my main pitch here. Like if they can do that, can we build that into our robots? So can we have very, very simple robots that still achieve awesome things once they work together, right? And then this would be our challenge, like challenge accepted, right? If the ants can do it, can we teach our robots to do that? So instead of building this one huge, complex, monolithic beautiful humanoid robot, maybe we can like invest the same amount of money, but buy many small and simple robots. Maybe they're even unreliable, right? But once we put them together, we can still solve complex tasks, and maybe we can also make the system reliable, right? You might have heard something somewhere that it's actually possible to take unreliable components and build a reliable system out of them. So this is like just, again, one taste of what you're going to learn here in this course. So getting complexity or being able to solve difficult tasks using very simple components. So now I'm getting a bit more into the actual terminology, right? You should also learn a little bit about that. This is not yet like following exactly the textbook, but main ideas that we try to implement or follow in swarm robotics are these. Scalability. So scalability means, can we build a system that works virtually for any size? So any number of robots, same algorithms. You go from 100 robots down to 10 and it still works. So you go from 100 robots up to 1,000 and it still works. This would mean maybe that we could go to unlimited swarm sizes and scale infinitely. That would be awesome, right? So usual systems can't do that. We also want to keep things simple. That's what I've already told you. And the third one would be like what is really the driver of these things? Like what makes it happen? And the key technology, if you want to call it that, would be probably self-organization. We will later, I think, see a definition of that, how to exploit so-called feedback processes to have like many interactions between tiny simple particles and still make them form global patterns, basically. This is just a little overview of like where you can find collective behaviors in nature. I'm not going into details here. We will hopefully provide the slides, so you can also look into that later yourself. Swarm robotics, of course, is also a lot inspired by biology, no question. And collective behaviors everywhere. So it's not just ants, not just social insects. You also see that in birds and fish, and sometimes to some extent, maybe even in humans. It's just humans are much more higher cognitive animals. So maybe we only see it in like panic behavior of crowds, for example. I would be a bit careful in like transferring what we learn here directly to the human organism. Just real quick, yet another slide. This is really nice work by Marina, and she analyzed like real quick what do these plots here mean. Imagine in the middle there's the considered animal, and then you look into different sectors around this animal, like different headings, different bearings of neighbors. And also different ranges in rings. And the density here indicates like where do you usually find the next neighbor, basically. And so you see that these plots are all like slightly different. This is about collective motion, right? A simple form of a collective behavior. But you can tell, okay, there's like a similar concept how these different animals flock or school, right? From fish to birds, goats, and to monkeys, right? And they also showed like you can actually find like dimensions to categorize these different forms of collective motion. Just to tell you, this is happening across different species. And you can actually find like general paradigms and compare across species also. So like good for us, right? So as engineers, we want to apply this. So there's general paradigms that we can maybe try to follow. And now a little bit more, you know, we're working our way here towards like the terminology. So I've mentioned very often already the word swarm. What is it really? And then it's interesting once you open textbooks on like biological textbooks on collective behavior, they like shy away a bit. So they don't really want to define the noun swarm. They prefer rather usually to define like what is swarming behavior. So they define a swarm via its behavior. And there they're also usually a bit narrow. They say, okay, swarm behavior is a form of aggregation. Makes sense, right? So you want to put like many organisms or many individuals close to each other. Otherwise, they cannot really interact. And then this is also, of course, often in biology combined immediately with collective motion. So because most animals need to move to search for food or to protect themselves from predators. So this is how they define it in biology. In the English language, then you also find that they have like different words for different forms of collective motion. I have already mentioned like flocking or schooling or herding, right? So once you talk about quadrupeds, if you compare it to German, for example, we don't really have like verbs for all these different behaviors. Yeah, just a curiosity. And then, yeah, I've mentioned already a couple of animals. So there's also termites, of course, honeybees. They're not so much like wasps, but by now they're gone. Cockroaches, locusts. So many animals showing swarm behaviors from which we can learn, right? And then this other kind of tricky, almost annoying question. Of course, in whenever I tell people, oh yeah, I'm doing swarm robotics, at some point people want to know, like, okay, how many robots do you need to have a swarm? Turns out the question is, well, the question is easy to ask, but it's hard to answer. So here I'm just pointing back in the time to a paper from 19 years ago by Beni. And he has a kind of involved answer, right? So he says it should be not as large to be dealt with statistical average and not as small as to be dealt with as a few body problem. So now I would love to ask you, like, who's doing physics and what do you think is a few body problem? But just to save a little bit of time, I will skip this interaction here. But there's like the famous three body problem, right? So if you do Newtonian mechanics and you try to predict a three body, like three masses being exposed to gravity, and you try to predict where will they be in like some delta t in 5 minutes, in 5 years. This turns out to be mathematically already very difficult. And I think that's what he's pointing to here. And then like kind of random numbers pop up, right? So he says like, okay, maybe we need like 100 to get away from the magnitude of the difficult physics of 3. And then 10 to the power of 23. Well, this is a huge number, right? So where's that coming from? And he says like not Avogadro large. And then the question is like how much you know about chemistry. So there's the Avogadro constant, weird constant. This is how many particles of carbon-12 you have in, what is this, 12 grams, like, okay, you know, bullshit numbers, but okay. But his idea here is this is, of course, in chemistry, you don't look into the trajectory of a single molecule or atom. You treat everything as concentrations on a higher level by basically statistics, right? So that was his point. So if you ask me, my answer would be don't go with a number, rather go through the behavior, a bit like the physics, the biological example we had before. So if they behave in a scalable way, in a decentralized way, and so on, then it doesn't really matter how many you have. 2 is maybe the bare minimum, but you could already call it a swarm because they have potential to behave like a swarm, right? So if that makes sense. And yeah, because for concrete numbers, there's this Greek paradox that we could talk about. Maybe I can recall that later if you like. Then also like a proper definition. So I'm not so much into definitions, but we can also get a proper definition of what is swarm robotics really. And here I'm actually also a bit sloppy, and I've used also collective robotics as a synonym already here. But some people argue swarm robotics is a like subclass of collective robotics. Also something we could discuss if you like. Just I have a quickly read here from this like again, like proper definition. Swarm robotics is the study of how a large number of relatively simple physically embodied agents. This is just a weird way of speaking of robots. It can be designed such that the desired collective behavior emerges from the local interactions among agents and between the agents and the environment. So here we already have this first mention of emergence. That's also something we will get to in a minute. I've talked already about like local interaction. So robots are not supposed to do like point-to-point communication across the swarm. That wouldn't scale. And then the other important thing here is this interaction via the environment. So this is coming from behavior-based robotics, if that tells you something. Like it's very about the situatedness. So the robot should like interact directly with the current situation, with the current environment, something that's not so standard actually in like good old school robotics. And this is then going back to Benny. So this here before was actually by Dorigo, the founder of the field, and Shahin. And this is going back to the paper of Benny. What are properties of robot swarms? And then he already mentioned decentralized control. So no one central element that sends commands. Lack of synchronicity, not really so often mentioned and maybe not so important. And then a simple quasi-identical members. So this is pointing to homogeneous swarms. So all robots are supposed to be same. Why? Because then you can mass produce them. Why quasi? Well, because this is the mathematical interpretation of if you build something physical, it will not be identical, but you could imagine them as being identical. Since a couple of years, people also look into heterogeneous swarms. So for example, combining quadrotors with ground robots. And you can also imagine using boats and as landing pads and so on. So there's a lot of things going already quite a bit beyond this good old definition here. This is an important slide. So often, of course, people would ask you like, yeah, still, I mean, nice, you build these tiny robots and then do things, but why would you really want to do it? And then according to literature, we usually mention these three advantages. The first one is robustness. We have at least in hardware, we have a very redundant system, right? So if all the robots are actually same, and you have so many of them, then you can maybe also lose a few of them, and then the system might still stay effective, right? So there's no single point of failure, no way of losing one element and everything breaks. I mean, good luck trying that with your smartphone, right? So if you remove one component from your smartphone, I guess in most cases, it would just immediately break, right? Here we have redundancy, at least on the hardware side. Software would be something to be discussed. Then flexibility, that's not so important, also not so easy to grasp. It's just because we have, again, identical swarm members. That means we also don't have specialization in hardware, which again means each robot can do like any task that the swarm is supposed to do, giving you some flexibility. Not spectacular, but maybe worth mentioning. And then scalability, if you ask me, would be one of the at least same as robustness in terms of importance. So what I've already tried to explain before, this is about system size, right? So can I use the same algorithm virtually for any swarm size, so any number of robots? You can already imagine like this cannot always work. What if I like put very many robots into one room? At some point they stop working, right? But at least if you think about swarm density, so this is how many robots you have per area, then maybe this could scale if you have a constant density, right? So for each robot you put into the system, you also provide more space, then maybe you can scale infinitely, right? If you follow certain design strategies. I think, yeah, I want to speed up a tiny bit. So this is just visualizing what do we mean with local interactions, and then we would be fully distributed, right? So not all-to-all communication, no central communication, also not hierarchical. What does robustness in the end mean? You can think of these graphs as being induced by sensor range or communication range of robots, right? That defines who's neighbor of who. And then what if there's like this one guy in the middle, and if this one breaks, everything breaks, or there's this one crucial edge. Once this connection here between these two robots breaks, then also you have two connected components, and that might break something. Robots can also join again, right? But this is just a quick visualization of like how to visualize maybe the concept of robustness. As a design guide could be avoid single point of failures at all cost, right? So always keep redundancy. That means don't store all the data on one robot, or don't make one robot be very important and like commanding half of the swarm. But I guess by now you got the idea, right? Robustness also means some kind of like risk management. So every now and then, some space agencies invest a lot of money into one single space probe. They shoot them up, and then they figure, oopsie, we have this one little bug there in the software, and then this thing veers off and was never seen again. So maybe same story as before. You can use the same amount of budget, but then buy maybe or build a couple of drones, probes that are cheaper, simpler, and then work together. And there have been, and there still are a couple of projects that look into like satellite swarms, for example. You could combine the antennas of all these satellites and then still have the same communication range or communication power as in one single space probe, right? So think of this as a means of basically risk management. Also, like this is kind of like the blacklist. So what is not swarm robotics? And then often people nowadays would mention these drone light shows. Hey, it's already possible to have thousands of drones being coordinated. Yes, but the sad story in terms of swarm robotics is that they have GPS waypoints. They are just playing through them. There's no interaction between these drones at all. So no adaptivity, no nothing, and this is actually not really even close to what we are proposing here. So also no all-to-all communication, something you might have in RoboCup soccer, for example, where we have teams of robots that always talk to each other. Also maybe have negotiations, who is going to the ball, things like that. So this is what we generally try to avoid, and this is all not really scalable. Okay, so maybe this is the moment for a first little break. Good. I still feel like we should maybe speed up a bit. So here the idea in the following slides is to give you some more details about like what is required, or what do you observe in these swarms as properties and also in terms of methods. I call that building blocks because I didn't know what I should call it. So we start from collaboration. There, the point is, I said, like, okay, let's, instead of building this one big single complex robot, we go for the simple robots. But then where should the complexity come from? Obviously, only from them working together. So they have to talk to each other. They have to cooperate. People also distinguish between cooperation and collaboration. So cooperation would just be like, be nice together to each other, don't disturb each other. Collaboration would mean like really enable each other to be better by working together. A bit like in this image here of these weaver ants, because together they can pull these leaves together, what a single one would not able to do, right? And so here we go. We have one more video. This is not from my own work. This is back in the time by Marco de Rigo et al. And they built these robots that can actually physically attach to each other. These are the S-bots. And so here it's a bit hard to see maybe that there's like a little quite steep hill. So a single robot could not really get over it. But now these robots initiate an actual self-assembly. So not like these kilobots that you saw before that just stop next to each other. These robots actually attach to each other physically with this gripper by gripping this like ring of the other robot. Whenever you do something like docking or connecting autonomous entities in engineering, it's always super difficult. Even after, don't know, 100 years of doing that, we still struggle to implement good, reliable, robust docking. So apologies for this taking so long. And then once they figure, now we are attached to each other, together they can actually get over this not so huge hill, but they can do that. So this is roughly the idea, right? So make them work together and then achieve things that are maybe simple for bigger robots. But again, you have all these other additional advantages of having many of them. What about communication? So for sure, communication is important. And usually you would think of this model. I think that's what people usually teach you, right? We have Alice and Bob and the channel, and then there's an explicit message being sent from Alice to Bob, so Bob can read whatever Alice wanted to write. You can also do that in swarm robotics, right? So just not across the whole swarm. So you can send neighbors to messages to your neighbors, of course. But sometimes it's a bit more like this. So there's a concept as called implicit communication. So by Alice just seeing Bob is around, that might already like not really send a message, but send an information, and then Alice can behave differently than if Bob is not around, right? So just by sensing, you can already get a cue. So this is cue-based communication, and understand that maybe today I should behave differently just because this other person or this other robot is around, right? And there's actually a whole philosophy behind that. So if you read Václavic, you learn that one cannot not communicate. Think of this old couple, they are married since 50 years. Do they talk to each other during breakfast? Not really, but still they understand each other, right? So this is what we try to implement in the swarm, I guess, that you can also, without communication, without explicit communication, you can make them coordinate themselves just by sensing, basically. This is also something you see in animals, for example. There's this idea of an unintentional index. So in snow, an animal might leave a trail, not really because they want to, but because this is physics and that happens to them. And then another animal that sees that trail might choose to follow. This would actually be positive feedback, or it might avoid this trail. So maybe depending on whether who's prey, who's predator, for example. And in contrast, explicit communication would be this intentional index, where, for example, the alarm cry of a bird is like probably intended. Again, you can ask, like, is this bird really super consciously doing that? But that would be the idea of the more standard direct communication. So, and we often make use of queue-based communication, also via the environment, right? This was part of the definition before. And then we call that stigmergy. This is communicating by way of the environment. And the classical example would be pheromone trails in ants. So they lay pheromones, and then an ant arriving later can use these to follow, and this is how a trail can form. It doesn't need to be pheromones. You can do like any change to the environment, like moving a chair or leaving some other material behind you, and then this already counts as stigmergy. It's mostly like a message to someone who will arrive later at the same spot, right? Also a potentially very powerful method. Sorry, yeah, I said, I want to be relatively quick, so I move on. The next is that in swarms, we often speak about two fundamental levels that just happen to be there. So this photo is just trying to get across that, like, okay, you can look at the swarm as a whole, right? Also indicating there might be something like a superorganism in biology, like the whole ant colony might be seen as a organism. But then there's, of course, also little entities which are individuals in the swarm, forming the swarm. And then we usually speak of these two levels, the microscopic level and the macroscopic level. And the micro level is the individual perspective, right? So this is what one robot, one agent can see and sense and know. And of course, this is limited. There's quite some uncertainty because we have these stupid sensors that don't give us the perfect readings and so on. So this is this like very limited view of the world and what's the state of the swarm. And then you have the macro level. This is like system level, right? The whole swarm. This is usually the perspective of the experimenter, right? So if we do experiments with our robots in the lab, we look at the whole swarm usually. The global view, we have then all the knowledge, maybe not about all internal states, but we know where the robots are, what they're doing. And this is setting the stage for a quite important fundamental challenge in collective robotics. That, of course, if you imagine this customer who approaches you, who orders a swarm robot program from you, they would formulate it on the system level, right? So I need a swarm that does A and B. They would not tell you, like, yeah, this tiny little robot first does this and then that. But this is what you need to program then, right? So you usually need to program on the micro level. You need to tell one robot at a time what they are supposed to do. And they might not even be able to speak of a macro level because they can't sense it. So once I called it like programming between the lines, right? You have to tell someone what they're supposed to do, but they cannot even understand the overall task that you want to achieve. This is certainly a challenge and makes this a scientific challenge, actually. Yeah. And this other comment is just like there's also micro and macro models. Maybe later you hear a little bit about that as well. And this is like this general schema that you can now try to visualize. So not sure how intuitive that is, that here the microscopic level is on top and the macroscopic is below. But if you get, like, if you start from bioinspiration, for example, we would start on the lower left. So you look at honeybees, for example, how they behave. Biologists would be able to derive a behavioral model. This is basically the algorithm of a single bee. You could get inspired from that, derive an algorithm for your robot, implement that as a C program, whatever, Python program, upload that to your robots, run it on your robots, and then see whether this is actually doing the job. And whenever you cross this border between macro and micro, so switching these languages, right? Like speaking of the whole swarm, speaking of what a single robot can understand, this is always making some trouble, right? You should always expect some difficulties in doing that, in transitioning from one level to the other. We also see that in our mathematical models. So I could even point to you a mathematical problem that actually also indicates this challenge. And then, yeah, we should talk about self-organization for sure. So this is originally from physics, where we observe sometimes global order from local interactions, sometimes also dubbed order from noise. We're talking about, in the most general way, spatio-temporal structures. If you have a system where you keep adding energy, you can observe that. And we define it by these 4 properties. So you need positive and negative feedback. You need fluctuations. Multiple interactions should be very clear. And then the 4th one is kind of like difficult, maybe sometimes to grasp, a balance of exploitation and exploration. And coming from physics, right? So typical examples would be something like crystallization. And this is what people then try to use as a concept to understand first biological systems, and then later we adapted it to robot systems. So positive feedback is, for example, something like this, a market bubble, right? Real quick. You have prices going up, more investors come in, more money is added to the system, prices even go further up. This will always, on this planet, this will always end at some time, right? Bubble will explode at some point and everything breaks down. But in a purely positive feedback, initial fluctuations, like whatever started the process, will be reinforced. Negative feedback, you might easily understand. So for example, in control theory, it would be this mechanism whenever you have a deviation, it's working against it and brings you back to like an equilibrium. I'm trying to be fast again, but I think it's something you can understand really quick. And then in physics, this would be a standard system mentioned, Rayleigh-Bénard convection, for example. Again, I'm skipping a few things here. If you're interested, I guess you want to Google that. You have that in like stone patterns, also in like I think salt lakes. Also now we have climate change, so there's defrosting, permafrost everywhere. Also there you see interesting self-organizing effects. Again, if you're interested, check it out yourself. This is maybe a bit more interesting. So if you ever got annoyed, why do you have at the end in your muesli bag always only the small nuts and dust in the end? It's not because they intentionally put all the good stuff on top. This is actually a physical effect called the Brazil nut effect. If you shake a bag of muesli, then the big nuts move up against gravity. A fun thing to observe, I guess. And if we have time, we will get back to that in a minute. Also, of course, in biology, you have these self-organizing effects everywhere, like in pattern formation on fur or skin. Of course, also in flocking. So this is seashells, tigers, giraffes. You get the idea. Flocking will be something that will for sure be treated later also. That's already speaking about behaviors that are also self-organizing. You can try to entertain yourself by trying to identify what's the positive feedback, what's the negative feedback in these systems. Morphogenesis, if you look into embryology, you see that at work, like these cells actually do move and they self-organize into patterns to form a like working living organism. Homeostasis, for example, if you think of ecological systems like a forest, also there you have these feedback loops that stabilize the system, and then you bring in more and more different species and they support each other and so on. Again, I hope you get the idea. And then this kind of like sophisticated concept is emergence. We already had that in this definition before, right? And this is actually like a concept of philosophical scale. So people say we observe emergent behaviors in swarms. And a real quick way of trying to understand what these people are talking about is think of these different states of going from solid to liquid to gas. And a truly emergent effect would be if you have never seen in your life a liquid, and then for the first time you see something going through the phase transition from solid to liquid, that would be a truly emergent effect for you, right? Because you have no means of modeling this or understanding that if you've never seen it before. And this is kind of like the idea. So can you have like completely new qualities in a system by self-organizing effects usually? So we can also quickly go through definitions. By now, you might know that I'm not a big fan of definitions, actually. So it's a kind of vague philosophical concept. It was quite popular in this community before. Nowadays, we're a bit more careful about it, as you can tell from what I'm saying. So new properties on a like emerging higher level that cannot be described by whatever happened below. Also often Aristotle is quoted, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. People define it sometimes based on surprise. So you're surprised by seeing it first time. I also just did that. Unpredictability. If you go to Dorigo, for example, again, the founder of the field, he defines it as solutions to problems faced by, in this case, he refers to a colony, ant colony, are emergent rather than predefined. So he even says like whatever you see interesting is actually an emergent effect. Long story short, I guess for us it's good news, right? So there's hope that you can construct something or engineer something complex by an unproportionally small effort, right? That's the dream of every student. I mean, you work for an hour and you do something awesome, right? By immersions. But actually, it turns out this is really difficult to make it work, make it happen by working again on the micro level to putting these little bits together. Okay, so time is running out. I'm trying to get forward a bit. I want to show you at least a few scenarios of like what is this actually used for? What have people published? We will not get through all of them, I guess. This is also just a random list from this Benny paper again. Not yeah, I think I had the idea that we have maybe one more moment for questions, but now that time anyway is running out, maybe we'll collect your questions for later. I will hopefully make sure that we still have some time in the end. So now I will do like quite a big jump. So I ended here for now this terminology discussion, right? But now maybe you're anyway very curious about like what is this good for, and is this all theory or you know what's happening in the world out there? How does this relate to my life? And then what I can show you here is like one of the most applied examples that I can offer. This is from an actual startup from Germany, EMHS. They were actually successfully sold last year to a huge Austrian company. So there's some people got rich, but I think it's more the investors than the engineers. But okay. So this is a system where they try to build technology for warehouses. As you know, I could show you also these videos from Mohsen Robotics. So this is what's happening all around the globe. People try to automatize warehouses with robots. So Amazon, for example, has something between 700K to 1 million robots working every day in their warehouses today, or maybe even more now. And there's many companies, startups, and so on that also try to go like same direction. This company focused on what I call autonomous hangars, right? So these are basically bags where you can put in small products. And these are actually, autonomous. So these are robots. They have motors, they have sensors, they have compute, and they can, to some extent, self-organize. And they got interested in swarm robotics because they found they went crazy, right? So they wanted to go to 1 million robots per warehouse, 1 million robots. That's what people are doing now. And they figured, okay, even with the finest means of communication that money can buy, if we do the calculations, we find out that you can only send 2 messages per hour to any robot. That's not enough, right? Because these are not warehouses in the sense that you bring something in and then you take it out a year later. Actually, it's more like a buffer, right? So you have many, many interactions, and whatever moves in now will probably move out in 20 minutes. So everything is almost all time in motion, and you need this communication. So they thought, maybe we need to go decentralized or at least hybrid, right? So traditional engineering is always going centralized. So one central planner sending commands. They already sensed this paradigm change. Okay, let's go partially decentralized at least. So of course, this is a company and there's legal constraints, but this is legal to show. Just that you also have seen some motion pictures. Okay, fun music, all right. Not too much that you can see here, but they move around. We have these monorails on the ceiling. And the problem is organizing these robots at the crossings, right? There's even elevators. And I would say this is good German engineering, right? And also they did some simulations, right? But they have to show their investors how does this scale? What if you have very many of these? How to organize them? How long does it take to get something in, to get something out? Yeah, I guess you get the idea, right? And this is happening now everywhere, and people are already making money with ideas from swarm robotics. Good. Now a little bit back to earth. So the more academic way of doing this, of course, would be can we go through different scenarios ordered by complexity? Basically asking what's the hello world program of swarm robotics, and you could argue it's aggregation. Here again showing like the biological inspirations. And then if you ask robots to aggregate, what does it really mean? Okay, you want them to move close to each other. Then you could say you don't care where they do that. So you ask them to aggregate at an unspecified spot. Or you say, no, it actually matters where they do that. So there might be an environmental feature that they first have to explore, find, agree on, and then aggregate there. Now, a fun question would be, like, can you answer that? Like, how would you program these robots to actually aggregate? And they have local perception only, right? So maybe you as a robot, you see someone close by, then you could just approach this guy. But then you have a cluster of 2 maybe, right? Maybe you're lucky and there's a third one, then you have 3. But you don't know how big the swarm is. Where are the other ones, right? So when should you leave the cluster of 3? Because there might be a cluster of 5 somewhere, right? So as I've said, this is maybe the Hello World program, but this is already a bit non-trivial, right? So how do you make sure they all find each other and aggregate in one spot, right? So there's different algorithms published in literature, like the B-class algorithm, for example, if you want to look it up, where people give you ideas how to do that. Also, what if you have a dynamic environment and so on. So this is again the idea, right? So do that without global information. So you also aggregate your study group or with your friends, but usually you use means of global communication, right? So you have a WhatsApp group, you have GPS, you have Google Maps. You can find each other easily, but what if you can't communicate longer than 5 meters away, and you don't have your standard pub where you meet, right? So how to implement that? So here I'm just triggering some questions, right? I'm not giving you solutions, maybe except for this. Potential field methods could be something. I have to skip through this, and there's also approaches from control theory. Control theory at some point will always break in swarm robotics, but simple tasks sometimes can be solved also with control theory. Mohsen might disagree, I don't know. So I always have to convince these people from control theory that what they do is not always the solution. So dispersion is then like the next typical scenario. This is like the opposite, right? So try to position yourself as far as possible from other robots. You could just like make them explode, right? So everybody chooses a random direction and moves forever in an infinite space that might be possible. Or maybe you also have another constraint saying, please move as far away from each other as possible, but keep connection, right? So that they stay as one connected component. Then, of course, it's immediately getting a bit more difficult. So there's, again, of course, many papers doing that. There's also biological systems that show you how it could possibly be done. So you could do it by signal strength and so on. But yeah, again, I hope you get the idea. And this is some interesting plot from different wolves that live solitary, I guess, and if they're males, probably. And they are quite good in not interfering with others and staying away from each other, right? Again, there are still some ideas from control theory. We're providing the slides, so if you're interested, you can look into that. I will skip that. And then maybe a last or second last example before I leave some time for questions. Clustering or sorting of objects. The biological example is here from ants. If you put live ants into a petri dish together with ant bodies, then what you see is an innate behavior in ants. They start to cluster these dead bodies, right? And again, well, here we don't know for sure how far can such an ant see, but they form clusters. Now I could ask you, how would you implement that for a robot, right? So a robot picks up an object, and then it needs to decide where to drop it. And but you can't navigate towards a cluster of objects because you might not be aware that it exists, right? And you might also not have a map or information where to go. So you have to move randomly. You have to behave differently whether you're currently carrying an object or not. How would you do that, right? So I can't give you much time to think about it. But here I give you one solution according to literature. So this is from this former mentioned book by Floriano and Mattiusi. You can do it based on probabilities. So if you have seen very few objects, but now you see one, then you should have a high probability of picking it up, right? So inversely proportional to the frequency of observations. Why is that a good idea? Well, the last thing you want to do is pick something up that's already in a cluster, right? Unless it's a small cluster of objects. And then once you move this thing around, then you want to have a probability to drop it. And the probability should be the higher, the more other objects you see around, right? So like opposite concept. And this could already do the job, actually. Now you could think about, can I still improve that? Can I optimize that? What if I want to sort? What if I have multiple objects? So there's red and blue objects, and I want to sort them. So blue with blue, red with red. Do I have like to introduce another probability, or how to do that, right? So these are like this like textbook academic scenarios and challenges, but they already communicate quite well like what this is about, right? Like what your mind should be able to do, I guess, at the end of this course. And maybe a last thing, very quick, because I've mentioned the Brazil nut effect, right? So this was this muesli shaking thing. There has been a paper from a couple of years ago where people got inspired and said like, we can actually use that to sort robots, right? How to do that? So these robots are homogeneous. I mean, they're marked red and green, but they're same size. So it's not like big nuts move up, big robots move up. So how to do that? So they have these two groups, green and red. Sorry if you can't distinguish these two colors. Not my choice. And they have different so-called collision avoidance radiuses. So robots always try to avoid each other or try to avoid collisions with each other. And you do that at a certain distance, right? So this is like your personal space. And here it's 8 centimeters for the green group. So if someone invades this 8 centimeter parameter of this green robot, it will try to steer away. And then the red robots, we give them a longer collision avoidance radius. So 8 times B. With B, it's interesting once it's bigger than 1. So let's say 2, 16 centimeters. So what happens? So the robots at the same time are also supposed to approach this light. We call that phototaxis. So robots should gather under the light. And now let's say, imagine the situation on the right-hand side. So you already have green robots in the middle. You have a ring of red robots around it. And now we add one more green robot to the system from somewhere farther away. What would it do? It would do the phototaxis, right? So it would approach the light. And then what would it do once it's getting close to the red guys? Well, nothing, right? So the red guys would actually react first because they have this 16 centimeter personal space. So they would actually move away. And the green guy, like as a very confident person walking in a Berlin pedestrian area, would just like walk through these red people, robots, and then gather under this light, right? And so you automatically get this sorting by just cleverly choosing this very specific like mobile robot feature of collision avoidance radius. All right, so that was actually what I wanted to show you today. So if you're interested, there's some references. And thank you for your attention. I hope it was not too boring and also without me being in the room. And now we have some time for questions. Thank you.